Hello everybody, it's new car time again on the channel. Yep, that's right, we're introducing the 8th member of the JAYEMM On Cars fleet. And this is something I've been after for quite a while. It also fills a few gaps on the driveway. So, it is a 6-cylinder, a 4-door, and it's also British. What is it that I've bought? Well, stick around and find out. Still guessing? All right, 2 more clues. I have previously owned an example of one of these cars, and I recently reviewed one where I fell in love with it all over again and asked my subscribers if anybody had one they were thinking of selling. Lucky for me, they did. So this is my new, to me, 2005 MG ZS 180. Now, I imagine right about now, half of you are going, woo, and the other half are about to switch off. But for you, please stop, give me a minute to explain why I think the MG ZS is actually a very good car. It is derived from the Rover 45, which itself can trace its roots back to Rover's days under Honda ownership. And for that reason, though it has many cheap Honda interior parts, it also has some pretty cool Honda engineering. So underneath, we have up front a double wishbone suspension, and at the back, a multi-link setup, meaning it's actually quite a fun car. Below the bonnet, you'll also find a 2.5-litre 24-valve quad-cam V6, producing a fairly modest 180 horsepower, but with quite a pleasing soundtrack and a very smooth power band. This is a particularly impressive engine when you consider that new, these cars cost just £17,000, and for that money, just about everybody else was going to give you a 4. For this sum, Alfa Romeo would give you a 1.6-litre twin-spark, and Ford a 1.8-litre in a fairly mild spec Mondeo. This is a lot of engine in not a lot of car. In spite of the relative bang for buck and fairly positive reviews these cars received when new, there was absolutely nothing that could stop MG Rover from folding in 2005. So, only a few months after this one rolled off the production line, it was already consigned to the bargain bin. And that's a shame. Though they always had their fans, the collapse of their maker, combined with build and image quality issues, meant that these are now cars in something of a predicament. They became extremely cheap very quickly, but they still have their fair share of common problems that can be somewhat expensive to fix. And without a warranty to back them up, many people were left to fend for themselves, and quickly found out these aren't the cheapest of cars to run. Which means, 15 years down the line, many of them are now in a situation where they're facing one of 2 choices. Either the scrap heap, or for somebody to spend a lot more money on them than they're worth. And very few people are going that path. But I am with this. So, what do we have here? Well, this is a 2005, so a very late example of an MG ZS 180. The 180 denotes the power and the fact it's the V6, which is the only engine I would have wanted. Not only is it the most interesting of them all, but it's also somewhat more reliable than the 4-cylinder K-Series alternative. This being a later car is an example of the Mark II facelift, so it looks to me quite a bit more modern than its predecessor. Despite the fact that here you still have pretty ancient by the time underpinnings, I think even now it's not a bad looking car. And in ignition blue, with that big spoiler on the back, I think it has more than a hint of Subaru Impreza about it. No accident, I'm sure, because back in the late 90s and early noughties, that was the car to have for the young man about town who wanted something sporty. I was offered this car by a subscriber who got in touch after I posted my recent ZS 180 review where I said I was thinking of buying another one of these. Several of you, in fact, got in touch with similar offers, and there is a possibility that I may buy another, something in the industry known as lorry syndrome. However, this was the first one that I went after for several reasons. First off, the colour appealed. It was also a later car, which I think does look a lot better. It has a nice story attached to it, and it's also a car I can make a tangible difference to. Plus, it was being sold to me at a very good price. But no matter how cheap a car may seem, I think it's always worth getting a CarVertical report, which I did when buying this. For the same price as the frankly awful motorway sandwiches that Laurie and I bought on the way to collect this, you can get a detailed and easy to read report on the car's history, which will give you an idea of whether it's been written off, if it's been in an accident, regardless of whether it now has a CAT status, if it may be on finance or potentially stolen. Even when spending only a small amount of money, making sure this stuff is as it should be warranty is vital, because if you are to spend a lot of money on doing up a car, you want to make sure that it's good so that in future you can get the best value for it. Happily, this car passed with flying colours. It was exactly as its sellers described to me. In fact, I would say the sellers of this were some of the most brutally honest that I've ever encountered, and that's the way I like to do business. If you would also like to get the same peace of mind I had from a CarVertical search, then please check out my links down below to get a special discount on the service. So what's the story behind this car then? Well, it's a fairly familiar one. It's been in the same family for nearly a decade. It was owned by one brother, then passed to his younger, who had it for a little bit. Eventually, a few things needed doing. There was a lack of time. Then the car got to a certain stage where it really needed quite a few things doing. And eventually it was decided that probably they were never going to get round to it. So Sam's dad, Simon, got in touch with me and said, look, we've got this car. We know you're after one. We're not going to mess you around. It's got a very short MOT on it. It's not going to pass without quite a few things needing doing. It's also got a few cosmetic issues, but we'll sell it to you for essentially scrap value. What was it I wound up paying for this car? £425, which may sound like a bargain, because in some ways it is. The last one of these that Laurie and myself owned, we paid £525 for. And that one also had quite a few problems, but in the interim, the values of these have generally gone up as their rarity has also increased. But still, this car perfectly demonstrates the reason why these are still going to the scrapyard. On the side, there is quite a bit of damage where the car interacted with a bollard, and likewise at the rear with a forklift. Fixing those is going to cost me more than the value of the car. It requires a new set of tyres and refurbed alloys. That is going to cost me more than buying the car. On the interior front, the headlining was sagging and has been removed. Likewise, the door cards, very common failure point on old MGs and Rovers of the time, but fixing that is going to cost me a similar amount to buying the car. It needs new discs and pads, really. They're not particularly bad, but they do judder a little, and with something like this, I generally make the assumption that they need doing. That's not going to cost me the same as buying the car, but it's still a couple £100. The car needs a full service. The cam belt on these is notorious. That alone is going to cost me about the same as buying the car. The stereo is more or less knackered. Putting a decent one of those in is going to cost at least a couple £100. It needs taxing. That's £360 a year. I am very happy to say that the MG Rover community is every bit as friendly as I've been telling everyone. All of the companies I've spoken to say that I've got this car and asked for help have said that they would in whatever way they can. But the reality is, even with me pulling in every single YouTuber favour that I can, bringing this car up to standard is going to cost at least £2,000 to £3,000. At the end of which, I'll have a car that's probably worth about £2,000 to £2,500. Why then am I doing it? Well, let me tell you. Reasons why I firmly believe this is a car worth saving, worth spending more on it in terms of both time and money than may strictly be sensible. And coming from me, that's saying a lot. I am presently driving this car down to my good friend Jordan, otherwise known as the detailing doctor, because he's going to give it a thorough going over, make sure it is actually a car that we can save and that the underside isn't too far gone. That really is going to be the big concern, and providing it is salvageable, and I hope that it is, we're then going to get started. It's likely, in fact almost certain, you're not going to see this car again until next year, but I wanted to film it and essentially introduce it to you all. A couple of things you may have already noticed. No, the exhaust isn't meant to be there. It's not shy, but it is an exhaust designed for a Mark 1, the pre-facelift car, and that has a different shape of bumper, so exhausts for that don't fit this quite so well. Handily, that is easy to solve. And what is actually stopping this car getting through its MOT? Because most of the stuff I've mentioned already isn't really a deal breaker. However, what is are the check engine light, the newly introduced SRS warning light that I believe is for the airbags. A relay has also packed up, which has taken out several quite vital, if weirdly unconnected things. So the washer jet no longer works, nor does the rear fog light. Today is the last day that it actually has a valid MOT, so we'll get it down to him and then the work will begin. So then, reason number one that I have a bit of a thing for the MG ZS, the 180 in particular. I really owe it quite a bit. In fact, in some ways, you could say I owe it my career. 5 or 6 years ago now, myself and my friend Laurie decided to buy something together. We wanted something a little bit fun, a little bit sporty, but that also didn't cost all that much money, so we could both enjoy it, in theory, not have to worry too much if one of us bent it, and potentially also take it on track days and the like. We put a bid in on eBay and won one for £525. In theory, it was a good car with a clean, fresh MOT, but that actually turned out to be codswallop. The car's anti-roll bar was disconnected, it had 4 different brands of tyre, each of which was knackered, and a whole host of other issues too. We quickly spent far more on it than it was worth, and I declared that I would never ever buy a dirt cheap project car ever again. Clearly, I do not learn. However, the MG brought me a gift because we made a video about collecting that car. The title was eBay Strikes Again, we've bought a car for £525 or thereabouts. It was the classic, car shaded out thing, much like I'm probably going to do for this. And that was my first big video hit. In fact, I believe it's still my 10th most popular video. Having any video do really well as a YouTuber is a thrill, but your first is something truly special. At a time when my videos were getting maybe 1,000 views, this got over 300,000. With that one video, in one day, we made more money than the rest of my YouTube career put together. It was incredible, and from that moment on, I knew that choosing to be a YouTuber wasn't quite as daft as I had thought. That car hung around for a little while, but unfortunately, because YouTube other than that one video wasn't doing so well, we just really couldn't afford to spend on it. Eventually, we sold it to a friend and got back pretty much half what the car actually owed us. At the time, I just got my Subaru Impreza and decided that, all round, was a much better car. It also was a car that Laurie couldn't really afford to run as a daily because, even driven gently, this will only achieve sort of high 20s mpg. I think I calculated my average on a long-distance cruise at about 27. Point number 2. For all of the reasons that I have already mentioned, these are becoming quite a rare thing. They sold reasonably well in period, but very quickly they began to disappear. Between corrosion and the many common issues I've already listed, they are quite expensive cars to run. And the simple fact is, when you've bought an entire car for £500 and doing something basic to it is £500, you're never really going to be that keen to do it, particularly when just buying another one is the cheaper option. I hate to see that happening to cars because no matter how good or bad they are, they're a piece of our history, and watching those disappear from the road, well, it's sad. With these, we can save them. We have the technology. We can rebuild them. I'm not suggesting that every single one out there should be pampered, loved and cherished, but a few of them certainly deserve it. I desperately want to get to Festival of the Unexceptional soon. In case you haven't heard of it, it is kind of what it says on the tin. A car show for all the cars which never really were that special when new, but now kinda are. I know Hubnut is a frequent visitor, and this might actually be a little bit too exceptional for that, but I do want to buy something that is worth taking. Something somewhat ordinary, but equally extraordinary. I love cars like that, they're very special. There are a lot out there in the comment section who believe that now I'm making some money from YouTube, that I've kind of forgotten about cheap cars, and that really disheartens me because I don't think it takes very long to see that I still have a real love of bargain bin motoring. They are, after all, some of the best cars out there. You ask any multi-millionaire with a nice impressive car collection and they will generally tell you that their favourite is one they may have owned 30 years ago that didn't really cost them much, but it's the memories associated with that car and the experiences that they had with it that make it quite so special. You see, what a lot of people don't seem to understand, and it's something I'm sure is true for most of us, is that 5 or 6 years ago, I really wanted a Ferrari, and I also kind of liked the MG ZS 180. The difference was that back then I couldn't afford a Ferrari. Now, I still like Ferraris, and I'm lucky enough that I can afford them. But I still like these. I still love them. And that leads me on to point number 3. They're actually a blooming brilliant car to drive. The moment you sit into it, you're greeted with a very old school driving position. You feel sat a little bit on the high side, but the truth is, it's actually that bonnet that's quite low. It gives you a fantastic view of the road. In fact, visibility all round is excellent. This is a really easy car to drive. It's totally undaunting. The power is nice, friendly, smooth. This also makes a pretty good noise, I have to say. I did my drive-bys this morning with my friend James. Thank you, James, for helping out. It is a distinctive tone that they make. They don't really sound quite like any other V6 that I know. They don't scream like my Lotus Evora, and they don't have the rasp of an Alfa Romeo Busso, but they still sound nice and better than many a 4-cylinder. The V6 in here also, by the way, has the benefit of being quite a bit more reliable than the 4-cylinder K-Series. Even with some pretty rubbish tyres on the front that are there temporarily to get me down to Jordan's, and knowing that the suspension likely needs a thorough overhaul, it's still a beguiling thing to drive. They're genuinely quite light cars, only 1,250 kilos, helping them feel not just light on their feet, but making that engine feel a little bit burlier than it otherwise would. Because this one is still missing quite a bit of its interior and there are a few rattles about, it doesn't feel the most composed. But it actually is. It rides the lumps and bumps exceptionally well. I've taken it down a few of my more demanding sections of test route and it behaves brilliantly. So well controlled, so supple, and really quite a riot. The fact it's quite narrow also means that it's very well suited to the roads that I enjoy. Having the 4 doors and 4 seats with a pretty big boot too also makes it a very usable thing. I can see myself doing a lot of miles in this next year. In case you haven't already seen it, as a little bit of a tribute to the old days of the channel, the official pickup video for this was actually launched over at JAYEMM Friends, where myself and Laurie went to go and pick this up. I genuinely didn't know whether I was actually going to buy it. I'd been offered it by Simon on behalf of Sam, but the deal wasn't done until we got there. I honestly was not sure if I was going to go for it because a lot needed doing and I was well aware of how much it was all going to cost. But after I drove it quickly, I knew I had to have it. These are so good. Still quite nippy as well. And even in its current condition, this is definitely better than our last one. I also have to say that both Laurie and myself have a bit of a thing for all of the early noughties MGs, and we've got some plans of perhaps trying to get all in the catalogue. He already has the TF, I now have the ZS, so we just need a ZR and a ZT to round things out. Anyway, that, I hope, is a fairly decent introduction to the 8th and newest member of the JAYEMM fleet, my 2005 MG ZS 180. I want to say a huge thank you to Simon and Sam for selling this to me at a price that I think was extremely fair. I have promised them that this car will be looked after the best that I possibly can, and I hope to stick to that. I think it means a lot to both them and myself that they're going to be able to see this car restored to its former glory. I also need to say a big thank you to Laurie, to all in the MG Rover community, particularly Paul of Project Nigel and also Scott of Discount MG Rover Spares, for helping me on this journey. If I can make it happen, you're going to be hearing a lot more from both of them. And of course, I want to say a big thanks to you for supporting the channel, regardless of whether this is the first video of mine you've seen or you were there when I collected my last MG. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, check out our second channel, JAYEMM Friends, and I hope to see you for the next one. Bye bye.